My mom taught me how to set the table. You know, you had the plate goes here, and you had the knife and the spoon and the fork, and you have your napkin, and so she taught me the right way to do it. Well, then when I got older, well, college or beyond, once I met Julie, I went to a fancy restaurant. And when I went to that fancy restaurant, I learned that there was so much more that could be included in setting the table. I mean, multiple forks. I remember the first time I was like, why is there more than one fork? What? You mean I can't use the same one? Oh no, of course you can't. You can't use the same solid fork for your food. But what I did like is when I saw that third fork up on top, the dessert fork. That's good, you know, there's good things to come. But other thing that I think is funny is sometimes the fork comes with the salad is chilled. Now, I don't know what the purpose of that is, other than, I mean, maybe you don't wilt the lettuce the first couple bites before the salad warms, I mean, the fork warms up. I don't know. But anyways, multiple forks. It was very different than my upbringing, but for some people, this is just normal. So sometimes we set the table differently. Sometimes you bring out your fine china and multiple forks. And sometimes you do whatever you consider to be your regular dishes, your regular setting. And sometimes we use paper plates and plasticware. And you know, sometimes I don't even use a plate, I just use my fingers. But you know, you set the plate differently, or the table differently. It all depends on the occasion and who's coming to dinner. Now, I want to apply this idea to sharing the gospel. Some people need the fine china. You know, there are people who are educated, and they like to use the big words, and they have tough questions, and it may not be the easiest conversation. They may be philosophical, and they think way up here, and so they ask some of those hard questions, and you have to take more of a more reasoned or apologetic approach. And you have to answer those hard questions, and sometimes you have to defend your answers. You know, sometimes you're required to give that 2 or 3 fork explanation of the gospel. But there are others who don't really care what you know. They want to know that you care. And then they're willing to listen. They want to know that you are sincere, that you are genuine. And then they're willing to listen. Some people have absolutely no interest in Jesus at all. I mean, you bring the dinner and they just start a food fight. They don't want to talk about it. And there's still others, though, are very open, very receptive, and ready to listen to the gospel. But with all these different people and different situations, it's helpful to know the situation that you're in and who you are talking to. So then you can be ready and set the table appropriately. So our passage today is actually made up of 3 scenes. And in each of these scenes, Paul goes out and he shares the gospel with people. These people that he shares the gospel with, they all have different inclinations, and they all respond differently as well. And so we're going to see the skeptical and resistant. And then we're going to see the receptive yet careful. And then some who have radically different thinking than Paul. And so we start then with the skeptical and resistant. Start chapter 17, verses 1 to 4. He says, "Now, when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ, or the Messiah, to suffer and to rise from the dead, and saying, 'This Jesus whom I proclaim to you is the Christ.' And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a great many of the devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women. In other words, several of the leading women. And you're going to see here throughout this passage today, Luke is going to point out the women. He's making a point here. The church isn't just for men. Okay? Ladies respond to the gospel as well. Ladies are a part of the church. And so Luke points it out and is careful to do that. But what we see here is Paul goes to Thessalonica and he goes to the synagogue. And as he goes to the synagogue, he goes there for 3 weeks, we're told, which is an interesting thing because sometimes we expect Paul was superhuman. And then when he shared the gospel, everyone immediately said, "You're right," or wanted to kill him. But what did it say? He said he went for 3 weeks and he had to explain it to them. For 3 weeks, he was talking to them. So it wasn't just these instant responses. Sometimes we may think, well, why is it so hard? Why don't people right away immediately believe when I share the gospel with them? Well, sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes effort on our part. And so he goes and he shares for 3 weeks. But notice what he did. Notice the verbs in those verses. He says that he reasoned with them. And then it says he was explaining and proving to them. You see, he's explaining. There is a logic to our faith. Our faith is not something that is blind. But it's reasonable. There is a logic to it. And he did that. He reasoned with them. He explained to them the gospel. And so he would go and he basically, to the Jews, he was explaining how the Old Testament pointed towards Jesus and how the Messiah had to die and had to rise again. Basically, he's explaining how did God take care of our sin problem? You see, our sin cut us off from God. How did God take care of that? Well, he sent Jesus, his son, who is the Messiah, the promised Christ, and he died in our place, taking our sin upon himself so we could be forgiven. And he reasoned through that and explained how the Old Testament looked forward to that and how Jesus fulfilled the promises of the Old Testament. And we're told here that some of them were persuaded. Some of them heard the explanation, heard the reasoned answers, and were persuaded. They understood it was true. It's interesting because when you have these words that he reasoned, he was explaining and proving, you get the idea that they were like, I'm not so sure about this. And so they had to hear it multiple times because they weren't just ready to just accept it. They were a little skeptical. But we call this type of teaching or sharing the gospel, we call it apologetics. It's showing the logic to our faith. It's proving what we can prove, what we can show through reason, explaining things and answering the hard questions. And some people that you will talk to will require this kind of explanation. They will require, because they will have those questions and they will be skeptical and they will want to know, can I really believe this? I mean, is it true? Can this possibly be true? And that's where we bring in the answers. And some people, some Christians love to get into these kinds of conversations. I mean, they just love to be able to explain, well, yes, let me show you how there is a creator. And let me explain this to you, how the resurrection had to have happened. And some people just love to do this kind of stuff. And the thing is that but we all need to be able to answer some of those questions, at least to a point. And there are many resources out there. If you're here and you're saying, you know, I wish I had better answers. There are many resources out there that give answers to these hard questions. And actually, I could point you towards some of them if you want. But if you get these resources, then you can be ready to give that answer, or to do what Peter says, always be ready to give a defense or a reason for the hope that you have. But I want you to notice in these verses who was persuaded and who joined them or believed in Jesus and became part of the Christian family. It says some of the Jews, and then it says a great many Greeks or Gentiles, including several leading women. There were more Gentiles who responded than Jews, which is interesting because they had the Bible, the background, but there were more Gentiles who responded than Jews. Because look how the Jews responded in verse 5. But the Jews were jealous, and taking some wicked men of the rabble, they formed a mob, set the city in an uproar, and attacked the house of Jason, seeking to bring them out to the crowd. So they were looking for Paul, but he wasn't there. Verse 6, and when they could not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also, and Jason has received them. And they are all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus." And the people and the city authorities were disturbed when they heard these things. And when they had taken money as security from Jason and the rest, they let them go. So we're told here that the Jews were jealous. Now this word jealous can also be translated as zealous. It can have either idea or both ideas. The thing is, it's good to have zeal or to be passionate for God and for His law. But these Jews, they're not just being passionate for God, they're just reacting to what they hear. They're not checking things out. They're just reacting, and they are actually jealous because some people are believing it and following it. And they're like, we don't want that to happen. We don't want them. So they're jealous of it. So what do? They go out and they stir up a mob. It says that they go out and then gather together wicked men of the rabble. In other words, these are men or people who just hung around the marketplace looking for trouble. They're hanging around. They're up to no good. And they gather them up and they get them all worked up. They form this mob and basically kind of start a little riot. And they go to Jason's house in order to get Paul and his associates and to bring him out to charge them. But of course, Paul's not there. So what do they take? They take Jason and the others there. I'm like, we can't get Paul. We'll take the next best thing. And they bring charges against them. And the charges are actually against Paul, but Jason is the one that's there. And what did Jason do? Well, he hosted them. And so he's now an accomplice. So whatever they're doing and whatever charges they're bringing on him, now Jason's in trouble as well because he's right alongside with them. He's helping them. And so they bring these charges against them. The first charge they bring against Paul is really more of a characterization. He says they're troublemakers. And he says they've gone all over the world and they've turned the entire world upside down. And now they've come here. Now they're here. Implication? They're going to do the same thing here. They're going to cause problems here. See, what they're implying is that they've gone, wherever they've gone, they go and they mess up society. And wherever they go, they disturb the peace. You see, they've heard about Paul and Silas. They've heard about how they've gone around teaching. And they've heard about what has happened when they've gone to these different towns. And part of what they're saying is right. They are turning the world upside down. But part of what they're saying isn't actually totally fair. You see, they have gone all over and people have believed in Jesus. And when people believe in Jesus, it changes their lives and it changes their way of living. The people change. And so the world is being turned upside down. The world is changing because people are believing in Jesus. But also, almost everywhere they've gone, there has been opposition. There have been people who have not liked the message and have opposed them. Now, who has caused the problems in society when Paul has gone to a new town? It's the opposition. They're the ones that are starting the fights. And so they're the ones who have disturbed peace, not Paul. It's been the others. So it's true they're changing things and they're turning the world upside down, but they have not been the ones to disturb the peace. Others, the opposition, have. But the second charge they bring them is actually a pretty serious one. It's punishable by death. They charge him with treason against Caesar because they say that there's a different king, Jesus. Is there a different king? Well, absolutely there is. But has he established his throne on earth yet? No. And were the Christians advocating rebelling against Caesar? No. But we can accuse them of having allegiance to a different king. And so they charge them with this, and this charge upsets the authorities. And they don't actually put anyone to death, but they are going to remove the problem from their city. They're going to take care of it. And so we're told here, and actually verse 10 tells us that he leaves, that Paul leaves. So it appears that Jason struck a deal with the authorities in order to save Paul's life. And Paul then had to leave town. So they take money from Jason. It says that it's security. It's kind of like bail money. When you pay some money and you promise to appear in court, and if you don't, you lose your money, kind of thing. And so you're paying this money. It's kind of like a deposit, guaranteeing that you will follow through with what you've said you do. And so he pays some money. Jason and the others pay money and probably promised that they would have Paul leave town in order to save his life. So here in Thessalonica, though, we see that Paul came across the skeptical and the resistant. And we may do the same thing today. I've come across people we talk to who may be skeptical, who may be resistant. When we share the gospel, many people may not believe right away. Most people don't believe the first time they hear. Now, I'm not saying that God doesn't ever do that or that he can't do that, because sometimes he does. But many people hear it 2, 3, or even more times before they respond. So some people require that time and repeated explanation. And some people even ask for proof. Of course, there are others who just won't give you the time of day, or may even attack you because of your faith. And when that happens, we simply draw near to God. We trust in him. We persevere and be faithful and just keep going. So Paul and Silas leave town to continue the ministry somewhere else. Look at verse 10. It says, the brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea, and when they arrived, they went into the Jewish synagogue. And so the Christians, they send Paul and Silas away. It says they sent them away immediately and by night. So it appears that they're still in a little bit of danger, that there are still people who would like to get their hands on Paul. And so they send them away right away, and they do it at night, and they send him down to Berea. Berea was about 45 miles away. And what do they do when they get there? Right away, they go to the synagogue, which what he normally did. And look at verse 11. It says, now these Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word with all eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. So they're described as more noble, meaning they have a higher character. The reason for this, they're basically saying they were open-minded, they were more gracious, they were willing to listen, but at the same time they were careful. It says that they received the message eagerly. They were glad to hear it. They welcomed it, but they weren't gullible. And they weren't going to just buy just anything that someone told them. And so they were careful about it, and they examined the scriptures. So they went through and they said, okay, this is what he's saying. Can that be true? Does that line up with the scriptures? And so they took the time and they looked and they studied and they compared and they said, does this match? This word examined is used of sifting through evidence in a trial. And it could be saying that they cross-examined Paul here by the scriptures or through the scriptures. So they said, let's look at all the evidence and come. And they did this careful study seeking the truth. And look what happened, verse 12. Many of them therefore believed, with not a few Greek women of high standing as well as men. But when the Jews from Thessalonica learned that the word of God was proclaimed by Paul at Berea, also they came there too, agitating and stirring up the crowds. Then the brothers immediately sent Paul off on his way to the sea, but Silas and Timothy remained there. Those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and after receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they departed. So things were going so well, and then the Jews from Thessalonica show up. The gospel was going out. People were believing in Jesus and being saved. But then the news reaches Thessalonica that that's happening. And those same Jews who couldn't stand Paul being there say, we can't have him there either. And so they travel that 45 miles just to stop him. You see, they're like, we don't want this to happen. We don't like this to happen. And they went down there just to stop him. You see, they hear what's happening and they just have to go. They have no other choice, so it seems. And so they go down there and they stir up the crowds against Paul, and they form another mob, but the new believers in town quickly send Paul away in order to protect him. When you share the gospel, some people are ready to listen and are wise enough to look into it. Now, some people will fight you, and some people are wise enough to listen and look into it and ask, is this true? And I just wanted to make this comment. If someone says, is this true? Can this be real? And asks a lot of questions and wants to study it and wants to look into things, don't be offended by that. It's actually a good thing for them to think through it and to understand it, because what they're doing is they're seeking the truth and they're seeking God. And so don't be offended by that if they want to check out what you are saying. In fact, encourage it. Give them a Bible. Give them books that speak to the questions that they have. Encourage that. Have discussions with them. Don't be afraid of people thinking or asking questions. Of course, this raises the issue, what if I don't know the answer to a question? Well, that's a good time for you to learn the answer. You can learn right alongside of the person you're trying to explain the gospel to. So like I said, there are resources, or you can come and ask someone. It's a very good thing. If someone asks you a question and you don't know the answer, I'll tell you the answer. I don't know the answer to that, but I'll find out and get back to you. That's not saying, oh, I'm not smart enough, I don't know. It's simply saying, I honestly don't know, but I will find out and get back to you. It's better to be honest and to be willing to help them find the answer. So if you're sharing the gospel and someone asks a question you don't know, it's a good time to learn the answer, and then you can get back to them. Well, Paul headed down to Athens. Athens is the home of many gods or idols. It's the home of temples. It is the epitome of Greek culture. And it is the gathering place for the most intelligent and wise philosophers on earth. Or so they think. So he gets to Athens, and look what happens in verse 16. It says, now while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, waiting for Timothy and Silas to come down, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. The city is full of idols. Now, I actually have some slides here I want to show you. Can you go to the next slide? This is the marketplace, the Agora in Athens, or the ruins of it anyways. But you'll see all those pillars. Those pillars would have had idols on them if they were still there, or they may still, they do still have parts of them. But those pillars, so everywhere you went in the marketplace, you were surrounded by idols. Next picture. This is a temple that was erected and put up for the worship of many different gods. And so they weren't very exclusive. It was just like, hey, we have some gods, a bunch of gods. Let's build one temple and we can serve them all right here. Go to the next picture. I found this one interesting. This is the ruins of a temple for a god of metalworking. Now, I was a little surprised when I found this, because I'm like, man, they had a god for everything. I mean, specifically a god for metalworking? I thought that was interesting. But that's all the pictures I have. But this is Athens. This is where Paul is. He's surrounded by idols. He says there are idols everywhere. The city is full of idols. And it says that he was provoked by that. In other words, it made him angry. Because as he looked around, there were all these idols, but what does he know? That there is one true God. And only he is to be worshipped. And so when he sees this terrible thing, it bothers him. He becomes provoked. He becomes angry by it. But although it angers him, and although what they are doing is terrible, he doesn't lash out at them and just try and tear them apart for what they're doing. He actually is concerned for them and has compassion on him and responds in compassion. Look at verse 17. So he reasoned in the synagogue and with the Jews and the devout persons in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Now, the marketplace, the people in Athens, they used to hang around the marketplace. It was a great place to just talk and have discussions. And so there he is. He's there, and there are people hanging out, and he has conversations with them, and he reasons with them or tells them about the gospel and explains it to them. Verse 18, some of the Epicureans and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities," because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting?" They're always interested in learning new things, so they say, "Tell us about this." Verse 20, "For you bring some strange or foreign things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Then we get this comment, 21. "Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new." This is a little comment by Luke. I think it's more than just information. I think he's poking a little fun. He's kind of like saying, they were always looking for something new to talk about. It's like all they did was talk about stuff. Oh, you have something new? Tell me. You know, they're always wanting to learn. And so, but here they are. And we read about the Epicureans and the Stoics. These were the two most prominent schools of philosophy of the time. And the Epicureans and the Stoics. I'm going to tell you this so you can understand what Paul is doing here, or how this conversation may have gone. The Epicureans, they thought of the gods as being distant and uninvolved in human life. And so they really gave little thought to the gods, because they're just way out there. They don't really affect us. They're kind of like agnostics today who believe, well, God just created the world and set it in motion and let it go. So there's a God, but he doesn't really involve himself in human affairs. The Epicureans, they believed that life was about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. In fact, there's a statement that sums up their view. It says, "Nothing to fear in God." In other words, God's not involved, so you don't have to worry about him. Nothing to fear in God, nothing to feel in death. Because the idea is when you died, you were just dead. There's no afterlife. That was their basic way of thinking. And they said good, and what they meant by good is pleasure. Good can be attained. Evil, and what they mean by evil is pain. Evil can be endured. So that's their philosophy. And they would spend all day talking about it. Then we have the Stoics. The Stoics were pantheists, meaning they believed in many different gods. They believed in all the gods. And they thought that because all is God, then God is in everything. So that's kind of their idea, that God is everywhere, God is in everything, everything is God. And so kind of the opposite of the Epicureans there. God doesn't have nothing to do with us. God is everything. He's all there. Or they are there. They emphasized reason and unity of all people and the divine. So unity of people and the divine together. They emphasized self-sufficiency and obedience. And they believed in destiny. In other words, life just happens the way it's going to happen. And so that's why, so the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, that doesn't make any sense, because if you're destined for it, you're destined for it. And so they believed in destiny, that life just happens the way it happens, and you just need to make the best of your life while you're there. So live the best life you can within whatever your destiny is. So these are the two major philosophies, but they were both very different than Paul's thinking, Paul's biblical thinking. And so Paul, his idea is very different from both of them, and yet he speaks to both of these groups. And so some of them called him a babbler. And the idea of babbler has the idea of like a bird pecking seed, like pecking, peck around like that. And the idea is it's someone who is picking up little bits of information from here and there and here and there and putting it together and talking as if they know something. So they're basically saying, who is this guy who thinks he knows what he's talking about? He's just up there saying words, saying things he's heard from here and there and put it together. So they call him this babbler who is acting like he knows. Really, they're just being arrogant and elitist and saying, how can this guy know anything? They think they know better than Paul. But you have the Epicureans who would hear what Paul would say, and they would say, well, this is nonsense because of his emphasis on God being intimately involved in the lives of people. In fact, so intimately involved that he sent his son to pay the price for their sin. On the other hand, you have the Stoics who would be intrigued by this idea of God, but not the concept of Jesus and the resurrection, because there was no afterlife in their view, and at least not long term. You might hang around for a little while, but then it would just, you disappeared. There was nothing. So let's see what happens. Verse 22. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, because they brought him up and they said, we want to hear from you. He said, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. He's actually complimenting them there, because they're searching for God. Verse 23, for as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. See, this is pretty cool, because what Paul's saying is that I looked around and you're so religious that some of you were afraid of missing one of the gods. And you don't want to offend anyone, so you put up this altar to the unknown God. So there's God that you don't know about, but we want to make sure that we still worship him. Well, Paul says, what you were doing ignorantly, I'm going to tell you who he really is. And he continues on. Verse 24, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by hands. In other words, he's greater than these temples. He can't be confined by them or contained by them. Verse 25, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything. He's the creator. He doesn't need anything, since he himself gives all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling places, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from them. He's saying, hey, God gave you the ability to find him, and he's not far away. Verse 28, for in him we live and move and have our being, even some of your own poets. So he knows their poetry. He's talking into their lives. Have said, some of your poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. And so Paul comes along here. He's basically complimenting them for searching for God. But he also points out that they missed the one true God, who is bigger than any of these other so-called gods and bigger than they are themselves. I mean, he is the creator. He is the source of all things. But then he continues on. He says, and by the way, we are all connected to him because he is our creator. And he created our common ancestor. So this would speak right to those the Stoics who thought we're all connected. He says, because we are all connected, and to God, because he created our common ancestor. And he created us. Verse 29, he says, being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. He points out their inconsistency in this idea. If God is great, he's the creator way up here. That means he's greater than us. If he created us, who has to be greater? Well, God does, because he's the creator. He's the one that made us. And so if I then make an idol and worship it as a god, I'm greater than the idol because I created it. right? And so how can the idol, which was created by me, be greater than me? He can't. And so he points out, says, this is logic. This is reason. God is the greatest. He's the creator. Then there's us, and then there's the things we make. And so he says it doesn't make any sense that you should worship something that you made or that man has made. He continues, verse 30. He says, the times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. He's telling them, you didn't know about this before, but God, he hasn't judged your idolatry the way he could have, the way it deserves. He said, but now I've told you, now you know, and you know that you are accountable to him. Your creator, you are accountable to him. And so turn to him and believe in him, and believe in Jesus, who is the only way to have a right relationship with God. And by the way, he mentions, and Jesus was raised from the dead, but this is a problem for them. Look at verse 32. Now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, we will hear you again about this. So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysius the Areopagite, so someone of important position, high position there, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. And so they cut him off immediately when he mentions resurrection, because they don't believe in an afterlife. Or many of them don't. And so they cut him off right away, and they're like, oh, this is dumb. And most of them mock him. Like, you're ignorant. How can you say such a thing? But we're also told that some of them wanted to hear more. And some of them, a few, believed. You see, when we share the gospel with people, there may be times when it seems like very little is happening. Or you look and you say, why don't people respond? Why do we see such small results? But we know that God is faithful. We know that God is working. So just keep it up. Another thing is, when we're sharing the gospel, sometimes the sinful things that people do may anger you. You may look at the world and at things that people do and say, this is just so wrong. It's opposed to the ways of God. It's just wrong. And it may anger you. It may provoke you. But don't just write those people off and say, well, I'm angry at them, so they're terrible. I won't have anything to do with them. Don't write those people off. But have compassion on them, because they need Jesus too. And if you are sharing with someone with very different beliefs than you have, it helps to know a little of how they think. Why is it that they disagree with you? Why is it that they have these questions? It helps you to know what they think. I mean, Paul understood these philosophers. He knew their poets. It helps us to think, or to know how they think, because then we know what to correct. Or you have this idol to an unknown God. And let me tell you the correct way to remedy this situation. You see, it helps you to know what to correct. It helps you to know how to make connections so that you can share the gospel to them and speak to them in a way that they will hear, the way they will understand. You see, everyone needs to hear the gospel. Throughout our study in Acts, we've been talking about this, that people need to hear the gospel. But today we saw that different people respond differently, and how we share the gospel may be impacted by who we're speaking to. Now, I'm not saying that the message changes. The gospel is the gospel, and the gospel doesn't change. There is one way to salvation, that's through Jesus Christ. The message does not change, but the way we have the conversation may. We want to speak to people's hearts. We want to speak in a way that they will hear, because they need to hear the truth of Jesus. So how do I speak the message as clear as I can to people, say, from different cultures, to people with different backgrounds, with different personalities? We need to understand the gospel, but we also need to understand people. We need to consider the people we're talking to. And then you can set the table appropriately.